sitting opposite 511 Somerset Street, Ottawa, Ontario. Does anyone know what happened at this location in 1945? This is where the Cold War started. On September the 5th, 1945, a Soviet cypher clerk, Igor Gouzenko, working at the Soviet embassy in Ottawa, decided to defect. And he smuggled 100 documents out of the embassy, and he came along this street on Somerset Street and went into this apartment here at 511. What he was actually doing was exposing the fact that the Soviets had actually infiltrated the American, British, and Canadian atomic programs. The Gouzenko case was so big, so important, that when he wrote his memoir, which published in 1948, is called The Iron Curtain in the United States, the Americans decided to make a movie of it. It was so important to them that they actually made a movie in 1948 called The Iron Curtain.
What is your duty here?
Cypher Clerk, Military Attaché's office.
As a cypher clerk, you're a fountain of information. No one, not even members of the embassy staff, must know who you are and what your work is.
No one will know.
And they came to Ottawa to film on location. They showed the tramways here on Somerset Street, the train lines going into the Chateau Laurier.
His first night in Ottawa, they met in front of the Chateau Laurier. They went to a gay restaurant. Gouzenko discovered that Canadians were a happy people, who even in wartime seemed to enjoy themselves.
Their stars were here. Dana Andrews, Gene Tierney, two of the top Hollywood stars were here.
I'm going to have a baby.
And I met a woman once who was telling me she was in a secretarial pool, and one day she actually saw Dana Andrews crossing the street here.
These people are not our enemies.
And of course it tells Gouzenko's plight. And he smuggled 100 documents out of the embassy.
What are those?
Diaries, cables to and from Moscow, agents' reports on the atomic bomb and what they've been doing in Canada.
Of course, Gouzenko came along this street. You can imagine him coming. Imagine the risk this guy was taking, because if they're going to kill him, right?
They'll surely kill you when they find out.
And the problems he had getting his message across to the absolutely asinine Canadian government.
Gouzenko went directly to the Justice Building, convinced that the information he carried must go to the highest level of government. He was determined to see no one less than the Minister of Justice.
But I tell you, the minister will not see you unless you tell me what.
But you must understand, please. I cannot tell my business to anyone but the minister himself.
Why not?
It's a matter of great secrecy. It involves the Canadian and Russian governments.
The minister's in his other office, at the Parliament buildings. Perhaps if you go there.
Please, we've been waiting for 2 hours. Time is important.
I'm terribly sorry, but the minister is running way behind with his appointments. If you can come by tomorrow, we may be able to fit you in somewhere.
Nobody wanted to do anything with this guy, and he had these important documents telling us that Joe Stalin was not our ally, that we are infiltrated, and he's after our atomic secrets.
If the Canadian government would not listen, then he had risked everything for nothing. Then suddenly he remembered what he had learned about the Canadian newspapers, their independence, their freedom. They were his last hope.
And in one of the most bizarre, horrible journalism cases in the history of the world, the journal told him to go away.
Excuse me, please. Could you tell me where to find the editor?
He's out.
It's very important.
Try the city desk, in the corner.
I have some very important information for you.
Sit down.
No, thank you. I'm from the Russian embassy. I have some papers here to go through.
Go ahead. I can listen to you at the same time.
Some papers that will prove that Soviet Russia is operating a spy system in Canada.
Go ahead.
This document will prove that one scientist working on the atomic bomb is giving information to the Soviet military attaché. There's no time to lose. Already they're looking for me. You must print these right away before they kill me.
Sure. Before they kill you. Your life's in danger, isn't it?
Well, you take that stuff to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. They'll take care of you, and there's Russians, too.
They blow him off. After that, the RCMP, they blow him off. By this time, the KGB at the embassy realize he's missing and he's gone off with documents, and they know he's a danger and they're going to come and kill him.
I'm afraid there are documents missing from the files.
What kind?
We are checking now.
We'll go to his apartment.
Fortunately, his neighbor gets him out of his apartment, hides him.
You and Andre will go to Mrs. Foster's next door. You'll wait there.
Hello there.
Go in. Go in.
So they show up here to get him.
Good evening, Comrade Gouzenko.
Then, the Ottawa police show up and arrest him. It's bizarre.
We heard them break in. We called the police.
What's going on in here? Who are you?
We are from the Soviet embassy.
They came here to kill him.
Those documents are Soviet property. They were stolen from the Soviet embassy.
We'll put you under protective custody until the government looks into these things. Come along.
And the KGB can't get him.
Oh, Igor. They're going to listen to you.
Luckily for Gouzenko, William Stevenson, a man called Intrepid, was here, and he acted on behalf of Gouzenko. Because believe it or not, the Canadian government were going to give him back to the Soviets. So he managed to get them involved. Of course, he contacted England, and England sent over some of their MI6 agents to interview Gouzenko. He had names and information, aliases, which really told you you were infiltrated by the Soviets. The Brits would say they'd send people over here to talk to Gouzenko, and they would come out and say that nothing going on here, nothing happening here. And of course, what would happen in the next years is the Cambridge Five. You'd have the first men, Burgess and McLean, defect in the early 50s. You'd later have, of course, Philby himself defect in the 50s. Anthony Blunt, the Queen's art appraiser, was not exposed until the late 70s. And later, John Cairncross became the fifth man of the Cambridge Five. So the Brits, MI5, MI6, were totally infiltrated. And if you like the concept of Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy by John le Carré, this is the story, and it started with Igor Gouzenko. The Americans took attention to this, and they took what happened here at 511 Somerset Street and turned it into McCarthyism.
One communist on the faculty of one university is one communist too many.
But of course, they also found out many Soviet agents were operating within the US bureaucracy. They didn't realize it, but they had one of the highest ranking Soviet defectors already living in the States, a guy called Alexander Orlov, who was an NKVD general in Spain. He had told all sorts of stuff, but nobody paid attention to him. He then had two American defectors, Elizabeth Bentley and a guy called Whittaker Chambers, come forward. And of course, they're exposing Alger Hiss, all sorts of people. But of course, what the Russians were really after was the atomic program. And they had infiltrated the Canadian one and the American one. And ultimately, this would lead to the death of the Rosenbergs and all sorts of scandal, and really the, I don't know, the heating up of the Cold War or the freezing up of the Cold War. So what happened here is absolutely amazing in terms of history because each country involved would treat it very differently. The Canadians would pretend that nothing went on here, it didn't matter.
What are those?
Diaries. Cables to and from Moscow. Agents' reports on the atomic bomb.
So they didn't care anything about it. You sort of have to why. McKenzie King and his external affairs people, you know, later on, of course, they included Lester Pearson in that pile. They wanted to give them back to the Soviets. And I'm always reminded of that famous poem by Frank Scott regarding McKenzie King. Why do things by half measures when quarter measures will do? And McKenzie King was a do-nothing guy, an errors of omission guy. He wasn't going to make any decisions unless he had to, and Gouzenko forced him to make a decision. And in this case, he jeopardized the life of a very brave man.
Those are not only papers. They're a death warrant. When I gave them to you, I sentenced myself and my family and my wife's family to execution.
In the end, he's got to talk to Truman, which is, thank God, is in the United States, because you have to remember Roosevelt had been fully conned by Stalin. He believed Stalin was an ally, he was going to take care of the old empires, which he disliked, but he wasn't. Stalin was the enemy. Churchill knew this, and when Truman arrives on the scene, he calls him out. The other part is the natural left-leaning of the Canadian bureaucracy, the federal civil service, and some of the politicians, including Lester Pearson. These guys tried to discredit Gouzenko as a shifter, a shirker, a money grabber, a greedy guts, whatever. And they discredited a man who was really a world hero, a Western world hero anyway, by exposing the Soviet underground, which had totally infiltrated. But in Canada, Gouzenko, even today, really ranks a mention. We got a cheesy plaque in front of here. And the building itself is starting to show a lot of signs of dilapidation. Gouzenko had to live a very interesting life afterwards. He used to appear with a bag over his head. He was this mysterious character. And fortunately, Stalin dies in 1953 and he's able to live out his life. But it all took place here. And the story is just absolutely phenomenal.
Today, Igor Gouzenko and his family live somewhere in Canada. Their lives in danger, they live in hiding under the constant protection of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Yet they have not lost faith in the future. They know that ultimate security for themselves and their children lies in the survival of the democratic way of life.